Welcome back to another boardroom briefing. I am your host, Paul Maskill, and today we're going to talk about something that almost every owner, if not all owners, have thought about, but very few owners actually understand clearly. And that question is, what is your business actually worth? And just as important, why is that number far more fragile than most owners realize, especially in the home service space? This matters because I promise probably 99% of home service business owners are walking around right now carrying a rough number in their head of what they believe their business is worth. They hear someone say business in their industry sells for a certain multiple, or they're at a conference and someone says, oh, I was doing this and my business sold for this. Or they hear about another company getting acquired when they were at the supply house, or they're reading on social media in a Facebook group and someone tells you something. So a lot of times when things are shared, it's based on revenue, and they assume revenue size alone makes the business valuable. And most owners that I talk to at some point have the mindset of, once we get to X, whatever X is, call it $10 million, then we're going to focus on being profitable. But if we're doing $8 million and all we got to do is then make it profitable, someone is still going to want to buy it. Yes, they might want to buy it, but they're going to buy it at a significant discount. So here's the problem. Over time, that number that you have in your head starts to feel real. Why does it start to feel real? Because you hear of other people getting acquired. Maybe some of your friends' businesses have gotten acquired. Maybe you're in a best practices group and you hear about acquisitions all the time. But the real problem is valuation is not a fixed number. It is not permanent, and it is definitely not determined by effort. Even if you look at the stock market, the valuations of publicly traded companies, which are massive, way more predictable companies than a $5 million home service company, their valuation changes every day. So how is valuation determined? It's determined by how predictable, transferable, and trustworthy the financial engine of the business actually is. So in this briefing, we're going to walk through the illusion most owners have around value, what buyers are actually looking at, why value can drop faster than owners expect, and what are the disciplined operators doing differently than everybody else. So that illusion that we're going to go back to, if revenue is big, the business must be valuable. Most owners assume that size creates value. If you go to any trade show, you go talk to anybody in the industry, within 3 questions, they're going to say, well, how big is your business? And almost nobody says, oh, my EBITDA is this, or my net profit's this. It's usually, I have this many vans, or we're doing this much revenue, or I have this many guys on my team. A lot of times they refer them to as my guys. I don't know why. We don't own them. They can leave today and be reemployed somewhere else. But that's really the illusion we see, that if revenue is big, the business must be valuable. That assumption makes sense at a very, very first level, surface level. If revenue has grown over the years, if the company has a team, if trucks are on the road, if the brand has been recognized in the market, they're getting all the Google reviews, it feels like the business must be worth something meaningful. We hear it from our neighbors and friends if they see us everywhere. So the internal narrative often sounds like, wow, we're a real business now. We're doing real revenue. We've got a pretty good sized team. We've built something substantial. Somebody would definitely pay a good multiple for this. And that belief gets reinforced by all those conversations that we hear and have in the market. People throw around simple phrases like businesses like yours or businesses like this sell for 4 times earnings. Service businesses are worth a lot right now. Private equity is gobbling them up. If you just keep growing, you're going to have a valuable asset. But here's the thing. Buyers do not purchase revenue. They purchase confidence in future cash flow. That is a very different thing, because most businesses are struggling to create consistent positive cash flow, which is the purpose of this podcast, to help those owners, and which is the purpose of what I do as a fractional CFO every day, of helping businesses create consistent positive cash flow, so that if you ever do want to sell your business, the buyer has confidence in the future cash flow of that company. So what are buyers actually valuing? What do they actually see value in? From a buyer's perspective, the question is not, how hard did this owner work? Now, I know you're going to justify a lot of the valuation in your business that, you put in 80 hours a week. You had sleepless nights. You didn't see your family. You've been doing it for 10 years. But the question is, How predictable is this cash flow once the owner is gone? So two main things to pick up on there: cash flow and owner not there. This means that buyers care deeply about things like gross margin consistency. Does the buyer know that if we sell this, our gross profit's going to be this? Labor efficiency. How well have you structured the labor? What are the systems and processes? What is the training? What is dispatch doing? What is your pay structure? And how efficient is your labor? So that's another thing, labor efficiency. The next one is overhead discipline, kind of tying that into office payroll. Do you have a track record of being disciplined in overhead? A lot of times I see when things are going really well, i.e. in the summer or, in the winter, if you're in certain, markets for HVAC, we let our overhead get out of hand, and then shoulder season comes and we're strapped for cash. The next thing, which is huge, is the quality of your financial reporting, bookkeeping, and accounting. This is a massive problem in the home service space. Most books that I look of companies are a disaster, and a buyer would devalue that company significantly. So that's the fourth thing buyers are looking at. Next thing is, this is more on the home improvement construction side, but customer concentration risk. So if you're doing a lot of work for a GC, or if you're doing a lot of construction work for several builders, or even if you're on the service side and it's maybe you have some commercial clients that make up a lot of the revenue, that is risky as well, because a lot of times that revenue is tied to a relationship between the current owner and the decision maker of the other entity. Next thing is management depth, i.e., how dependent is this business on the owner? Is there a layer of management and leadership that can run this business when the owner isn't there? So what does the management team look like? That is super valuable, because ideally the buyer of your company does not want to do all the things you're probably doing right now, which brings us to the next one: dependence on the owner. If you talk to most owners, once they get to, say 5 million, they're going to say, I only work like a few hours a day, especially when they're getting ready to trying to sell their business. But here's the thing, it's more than a few hours a day. And what takes an owner that's been doing it for 20 years, a few hours a day, would take somebody else, 50, 60, 70 hours. So how dependent is this business on the owner? And then the last thing that buyers care about is what we talked about at the beginning, the cash flow. How stable, how predictable is this business when it comes to cash generation? So those are the things. We're going to run through them again: gross margin consistency, labor efficiency, overhead discipline, quality of financial reporting, customer concentration risk, management depth, dependence on the owner, and stability of cash generation. So those are the things that buyers care deeply about. In other words, buyers are asking, can this business keep producing reliable profits and cash flow without heroic efforts from the current owner? And that's why two companies with similar revenue can have very different values, even if they're in the same industry. So one may be highly transferable and financially stable. The other may be operationally dependent, margin fragile, and financially messy. So from the outside, they look very similar. Similar number of vans. They got all the Google reviews. They got a big team. They're doing the revenue. They're doing all the things. But to a buyer, they are not similar at all. So here's where I want you guys to really start to focus on. So not only all the things we talked about, but why is that number, even if you got your business valued today, why is that number more fragile than owners think? And this is where many owners get surprised. They assume that once the business reaches a certain level of revenue, that valuation is more or less locked in. But valuation can move quickly when financial predictability weakens. And that is especially true in the home service space, because a lot of the revenue is being, if not all, is being generated by technicians, and you're starting every day at zero. Other than having maintenance plans, you're starting every day with $0 of revenue. So a buyer sees that as a massive risk. What happens if 2 or 3 technicians leave? That is a massive amount of money that is all of a sudden leaving the business. So other examples of where value can get hit: maybe the margins are not consistent. So it really depends on, well, if we have a good month, our margins are good, but if not, our margins are terrible. So it's not really predictable. Maybe that's a marketing problem. Maybe that's a sales problem. Maybe that's a pricing problem. If cash flow feels unpredictable, if you don't know how much cash flow you're going to produce this month, and if the potential owner, the buyer, doesn't see that, the value is going to get hit. When you go to sell your business, you're going to go through a process which is called add backs. So basically the owner is adding back expenses that the new owner would not have to realize. So maybe simple one is maybe you're paying yourself $300,000 on salary, but your replacement cost is really $150,000. So they would add back the difference. Maybe you're putting a lot of personal expenses through the business for tax purposes, and you want to add those back. But the minute those add backs become questionable is the minute that that potential buyer starts to lose trust in you, which means valuation goes down because risk is going up. Another way that value can get hit is if the financial reporting is not clear. If it isn't clear on why does the balance sheet look this way or why does the P&L look this way, and then really looking into the balance sheet. Are your receivables correct? Are your payables correct? All of the things that go into, and a lot of times it's on the balance sheet where most business owners don't even pay attention to. Again, owner dependency. How dependent is this business on the actual owner? If you did a time audit of how you spend every single day, how many decisions are actually falling on you? How much work is actually falling on you? Even if it doesn't take a lot of time, but maybe it's your brain power of you just know how to do a lot of things really efficiently. And without you, could the business survive? And then lastly, that I talked about at the beginning of this list is your labor problems create unstable profitability. So when they start going through due diligence, the potential buyer is going to look at all of employee records. And if they see a lot of people that have only worked there for 3, 6, 9 months, they're going to be like, why do you have so much turnover? Why do you have so many new people? That is going to give them a little bit uneasiness, which means it's a little bit more risky, which means the value goes down. There's also just the inherent risk of what happens if all these technicians leave when we take over. So making sure that they are set up for success, making sure that they have incentives to stay, making sure that they are the right people to continue to produce cash flow when you are not there anymore. A buyer sees all of these things and immediately, like I said, if there's issues there, they start discounting it due to risk. Risk changes value fast, and that's why a business can feel strong operationally, but still not be super valuable because there's too much risk for the potential buyer to take over. So lastly, before we get into what does a disciplined operator do, how are we accidentally destroying value without even realizing? So basically, what are some things we're doing that we don't even know we're doing that we can stop doing today? A lot of value destruction is not dramatic. It's not one big decision. It happens over time, slowly but surely. One of the things is weak pricing discipline. So I see a lot of times companies' gross profit goes down a little bit every year. It might go from 50 to 49 to 47. Maybe it goes back up to 48, drops to 46. But over time, their material or their labor is creeping up and they are not repricing, so they have poor pricing discipline. Or maybe on certain things, they don't price it accordingly because they believe, well, the market's not going to pay that. So that's a big issue. Another thing, we had talked about it before, but maybe you're not working a lot of time in the business, but maybe you are, maybe the business is dependent on a lot of your decisions. Do you have a lot of people calling you to, for answers and for feedback on, hey, how should we handle this? So that's where value is quietly being destroyed because we think, well, we'll, one, it doesn't take me that much time. I don't mind answering the phone 10 times a day. And 2, at least I don't have to go to the office every day. And 3, eventually I get tired of this and then I can hire it out. But for now, I'm just going to keep doing it because one main reason is we just don't trust anybody else with making those decisions. And we don't want to take the time to build the SOPs or build the training to have someone else do it there. Another thing that I see, and it kind of ties into the weak pricing discipline, is the poor labor economics. If we're giving people raises every year just because that's what we do, especially on, this is all on field labor. So especially for those companies that are just paying hourly and there is no performance pay, what do the economics do when, we just gave them a 50-cent raise? Or a lot of times what I see that slowly destroys companies from a labor economic standpoint is when they're actually busier and producing more revenue, their gross profit goes down because they're hourly employees, and their hourly employees, call it an HVAC in the summer and the winter, depending where they're at. they might be working 50, 60 hours a week, and all of that overtime is poor labor economics. And then lastly, a lot of times I see companies say they're doing $8 million of revenue, but they have the office staff and overhead for a $10 to $12 million company. And they try to tell themselves, well, once we get to 10 to 12 million, then we're going to be profitable. Well, here's the thing. Once you start getting there, you're probably going to continue to hire and continue to increase your overhead because you've built in kind of such a habit that as we keep growing, we need to keep growing everything. And a lot of times that overhead and office payroll never catch up. Once we do get to 10 million, if we get there, because a lot of times we'll never be able to get there because we don't have the cash. But if we get there, then all of a sudden, our office payroll and overhead is that of a $12 to $14 million company. So that's another thing that I see, quietly destroys value. And it's 1 percentage point here, 2 percentage points here. It's like, oh, that person's only like, 60,000 a year. That's not a big deal. But you have like 4 or 5 of those decisions every year, and that adds up. So that's where I see owners slowly destroying value without actually realizing it. And a lot of times, this feels like, well, that's just what we do as a business. But what we really need to start doing and transition, what does the disciplined operator do, is they are building their business to sell at all times. So there is a great book by John Warlow, Built to Sell. The disciplined operator is protecting value before they ever actually want to sell. The great thing about that is if you ever did have to sell, maybe there's an emergency, maybe there's a death in the family, maybe you have to relocate suddenly. If your business is always ready to sell, then you're always going to be worth a lot more money than probably everybody else. And I like to kind of equate this to the real estate space, especially on personal homes. You have, really there's like 2 types of people who are selling their home and when they're getting ready to sell. Some people are like, we've kept up our home and enjoyed living in it, and we always keep it nice and we always do the maintenance, and we're always, it's always a great place to live. And then you have the other people, which is probably a majority of people when they go to sell their home. They're like, well, we need like 4 to 6 months to get our house ready. And we've got to get the painters in. We've got to get the carpenters in. We got to get the landscapers in. We need the door guy in. We've got to get the cabinet guy in. We got to put in new carpet. And they do all these things. And to me, it's like, why didn't you do that all along? And your house would be a lot more enjoyable. And you could then go to market today and not, and a lot of times all that deferred maintenance adds up, which, as you guys know, in the home service space, that's why we have maintenance plans, right? Bringing it back to the home service space, if we're maintaining our HVAC system and our, and our electrical panel and our water heater, it's going to last a lot longer. Not going to have to replace as much. So in theory, it should be saving us money. So what is the disciplined operator doing in order to have their business ready to sell at all times? They think about valuation long before they plan to exit. They do not treat value like a future one-time event. They treat it like this, a daily operating standard. If you have a daily operating standard, what I have found is any human rises and falls to the standards that they are given. And if your standards are low, you're going to attract people who have low standards. You're going to repel the people who have high standards because they do not like working for companies that have low standards. So the disciplined operator are asking questions like this. If a buyer looked at this business today, would the numbers build confidence or create doubt? Pretty simple question. And if you're honest with yourself, remove your emotion, remove your ego, it'd be pretty easy to answer that question. Second, how dependent is this business on me personally? If I am an integral part, whether it's from a time standpoint or a decision-making standpoint, then that's when we really have to start questioning, what do I need to do so that this business doesn't need me every single day? If you ask Mike McAllowitz, he says if you can't take a 4-week vacation, your business is not a business, it's a job. Now, you guys have heard that saying a million times, it's not a business, it's a job, that horse has probably been beaten to death. But if you can't take a 4-week vacation, then your business probably needs you more than you think. Next thing, they're looking at their margins on a regular basis. Are these margins stable enough to feel durable? Is this not like a one-time event of like, well, we hit our margins this month, so now we're good for a few months? No, it needs to be stable. It needs to be predictable. Looking at their financials. This is where you probably need outside help because a lot of times business owners don't know what they don't know. If you had a financial professional, whether that's an M&A advisor, a buy-side advisor, a quality of earnings person, a CFO, look at your financials, and they looked at it, and maybe you need them to look at it, are they going to say these financials are clear, or do they need some work? And then lastly, are we actually building value, or are we just really, really busy and complex? When you have that mindset, it changes how the company is run, because once an owner begins operating for transferability, the business usually gets healthier right away. That is what I work with our clients on every single day. We set the big goal, but then we focus on what do we need to do today in order to start getting there. Again, I'm going to say that statement again. Once an owner begins operating for transferability, the business usually gets healthier right away. Transferability doesn't necessarily mean you got to sell the business today. It could be, I want this business to run without me. I want this business to be financially healthy. I want this business to have predictable margins. I want to be able to go home and tell my spouse that, hey, this business is going to create X amount of cash flow every single month. Decision-making improves. Overhead gets more disciplined. Margins matter more. Leadership depth matters more. And the company becomes stronger, just not more sellable. It becomes stronger. And then at some point when you want to sell, it is value there for anybody. Businesses that are valuable are usually very healthy businesses that are run by a very strong leadership team. In closing, if you've been carrying around that rough number that we talked about in your head about what your business is worth, take a step back and actually pressure test that to what the number is actually built on. Go back to everything we talked about in this episode today, because revenue does not create value by itself. Predictability creates value. Transferability creates value. Trust in the earnings and cash flow creates value. And the more fragile your margins are, your financial reporting is, or your labor economics or owner dependence, the more fragile your valuation is too. And you could get your business valued by 4 different people, and they might give you 4 wildly different numbers. If this conversation resonated with you, please head over to my website. Go to thebluecollaradvisors.com. There you can check out all the resources, podcast show notes. And most importantly, if you need help with your business, you can book a call with me where we'll dive into your business, figure out what's working, what's not working, where are the areas of opportunity, and what are the biggest red flags. Lastly, this podcast exists to help you create clarity, help provide clarity. That's exactly what we need in a business so we can sleep well at night and have a business that creates predictable, positive cash flow. Until next time, I'll see you in the next boardroom briefing.